The Silence Before Dawn, an epic dark fantasy tale. Prologue. When the Bells Stopped. There were 13 bells in the city of Ashgate, and they had rung every hour for 300 years without fail. Each bell had a name, a voice, a purpose. The bell of dawn, the bell of markets, the bell of morning. Together they measured time, marked moments, gave rhythm to the city's heartbeat.
Until the day they stopped.
It happened without warning, on an ordinary autumn morning. The hour came for the bells to ring, and instead there was only silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that people stopped in the streets and looked up at the 13 towers scattered throughout the city, waiting for a sound that never came. At first there was confusion, then concern. Then, as the hours passed and the bells remained silent, fear began to creep through Ashgate like frost spreading across glass. Because everyone knew what the bells represented. They were not merely timekeepers or civic ornaments. They were wards, protections, barriers against something ancient and terrible that had been sealed beneath the city when it was first founded. The bells were chains made of sound, holding back a darkness that had nearly consumed the world once before. And now those chains had broken. This is the story of what happened next. This is the story of 5 people who stood between their city and annihilation. This is the story of the silence before dawn and the darkness that filled it. Normally. Part 1. The Bellkeeper's Daughter. Her name was Mara Thornwood, and she was 26 years old when the bells stopped ringing. She had lived her entire life in the shadow of the central tower, where the greatest of the 13 bells, the bell of the first dawn, had hung for 3 centuries. Her father had been the master bellkeeper, responsible for maintaining the intricate mechanisms that powered the bells, and he had trained her in the craft from childhood. Mara had always known the bells were important. Her father had told her stories about the founding of Ashgate, about the darkness that had been imprisoned beneath the city, about the bells that kept it contained. She had thought they were just stories, the kind of dramatic tales adults told to make their work seem more significant. She had been wrong. The morning the bells stopped, Mara was in the central tower's mechanism room, oiling the gears that connected to the massive clapper. It was routine maintenance, something she had done 1,000 times before. But when the hour struck and the mechanism should have engaged, nothing happened. The gears didn't turn. The clapper didn't swing. The bell remained silent. Mara spent an hour checking every connection, every gear, every cable. Everything was in perfect working order. The mechanism should have functioned flawlessly, yet it didn't move, as though some invisible force was preventing it from operating. She ran to the other towers, checking each bell in turn. The story was the same everywhere, mechanisms in perfect condition, yet completely non-functional. It made no sense. Mechanical failures didn't happen simultaneously across 13 different towers without a common cause. By the time she reached the 7th tower, panic was beginning to set in across the city. People gathered in the streets, pointing at the silent towers, speaking in frightened whispers. The city guard was trying to maintain order, but even they looked unsettled. Mara pushed through the crowds, heading for the archives, an ancient library beneath the city's cathedral where the oldest records were kept. If there were answers about what was happening, they would be there, in the documents from Ashgate's founding. The archives were dim and dusty, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across rows of ancient books and scrolls. The head archivist, a wizened old man named Cornelius, looked up from his desk as Mara entered. "The bells," she said without preamble. "I need to see the founding documents. Everything about why they were built and what they're meant to protect against."
Cornelius's face went pale. "You felt it too, then? The stopping?"
Everyone felt it. The whole city knows something's wrong.
The old archivist rose slowly and moved to a locked cabinet at the back of the archives. He produced a large iron key and opened it, revealing a single book bound in black leather, its pages yellowed with age.
"This is the Chronicle of Chains," Cornelius said, handling the book with reverent care. "It was written by the city's founders 300 years ago. Your father read it once when he first became Master Bellkeeper. He made me promise never to show it to anyone else unless—" he paused, "unless the bells stopped ringing." Mara took the book and began to read. The text was written in an archaic dialect, difficult to parse, but certain words jumped out at her. Darkness, consuming, sealed, 13 chains of sound, and most ominously, when the bells fall silent, you will have 3 days before the sleeper wakes.
3 days.
The book went on to describe what lay beneath Ashgate, an entity so ancient and powerful that it predated human civilization, a being of pure entropy that fed on life and light and left only void in its wake. The founders had not killed it, could not kill it, but they had managed to imprison it, using a combination of physical seals and magical wards powered by the constant ringing of bells.
The bells were not just alarms or timekeepers. They were weapons, their sound a cage that kept the sleeper bound in eternal slumber. As long as they rang, the creature could not wake.
But now they had stopped.
Mara looked up from the book, her hands shaking. 3 days? That's all we have?
"That's what it says," Cornelius confirmed grimly. 3 days before the seals fail completely and the sleeper rises. After that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to.
"Can the bells be repaired?" Mara asked desperately. "If I can figure out what's stopping the mechanisms."
"It's not a mechanical failure," said a new voice from the doorway.
Mara turned to see a woman entering the archives. She was perhaps 40, dressed in the dark robes of a scholar, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, but shadowed with worry. "Professor Ilara Voss," the woman introduced herself. "I teach at the university in the Department of Ancient Studies. I've been researching the city's foundations for years, and I believe I know what's happened to your bells."
"Tell me," Mara said. Professor Voss moved to a table and spread out a map of Ashgate, marking the locations of the 13 bell towers. "The towers form a pattern," she explained, "a geometric configuration designed to channel and focus sound in very specific ways. But that configuration requires a power source, something to energize the bells and give their ringing the supernatural properties needed to maintain the seals."
"What kind of power source?" Mara asked.
"Originally, it was a crystal," Voss said, "a fragment of something called the harmonic stone, which was said to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. The crystal was placed in a chamber beneath the central tower, directly above where the sleeper is imprisoned. Its vibrations powered the bells for 3 centuries.
So the crystal failed?
"Not failed, stolen." Voss's expression was grim. 2 nights ago, someone broke into the chamber and removed the harmonic stone. Without it, the bells can't function.
They're just ordinary metal now, incapable of maintaining the seals. Mara felt her blood run cold. Who would do that? Who would even know about the stone, let alone be able to reach it? The chamber beneath the central tower is sealed, protected by locks and guards.
Someone with knowledge of the old ways, Voss said. Someone who understood the bell's true purpose and wanted them silenced. As for who, she pulled out a piece of paper covered in notes. I've been investigating rumors of a cult that's been active in the city for the past year. They call themselves the Children of the Deep Silence. They believe the sleeper is not a monster to be feared, but a god to be worshipped, and that when it wakes, it will remake the world in a purer form.
Fanatics, Cornelius said with disgust.
Fanatics with the harmonic stone, Voss corrected, which means we need to find them, retrieve the stone, and restore it to the chamber before the 3 days are up. Otherwise, everyone in this city, everyone in the world perhaps, will die when the sleeper wakes.
Mara looked at the map, at the marked locations of the bell towers, at the notation indicating the hidden chamber beneath the central tower. Do you know where this cult is hiding? I have leads, Voss said, but I'll need help following them. The city guard won't believe me. They think the bells stopped due to mechanical failure and that the founding stories are just legends. By the time they realize the truth, it will be too late.
Then we do it ourselves, Mara said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. You find the cult. I'll figure out how to restore the stone once we have it. Between us, maybe we can save the city.
Voss studied her for a moment, then nodded. You're your father's daughter. He would be proud. She rolled up the map. Meet me at the old warehouse district at midnight. I know someone there who might have information. And bring any weapons you can carry. The Children of the Deep Silence are not known for their hospitality.
Part 2. The Thief and the Scholar.
The warehouse district of Ashgate was a maze of abandoned buildings and narrow alleys, a place where the city's poor and desperate made their homes among the ruins of past prosperity. It was dangerous after dark, controlled by gangs and criminals who answered to no law but their own.
Mara arrived at midnight as instructed, carrying her father's old sword, a weapon she barely knew how to use, but which made her feel slightly less vulnerable. She found Professor Voss waiting in the shadows of a collapsed warehouse, and with her was a young man Mara hadn't expected. He was perhaps 23, lean and wiry, dressed in dark clothes that allowed him to blend into shadows. His face was sharp and clever, marked by a scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheek. He had the look of someone who had spent their life on the wrong side of the law.
This is Wren, Voss introduced him. He's a information broker.
I'm a thief, Wren corrected cheerfully. No point in pretty words. The professor hired me 6 months ago to help with her research, which mostly meant breaking into places I shouldn't and stealing documents that people wanted to keep hidden. I'm very good at what I do.
Can we trust him? Mara asked Voss directly.
I wouldn't be here if we couldn't, the professor replied. Wren has already proven himself invaluable. He's the one who discovered where the Children of the Deep Silence hold their meetings. Wren produced a hand-drawn map from his pocket. There's an old temple in the sunken quarter, the part of the city that flooded 20 years ago and was never rebuilt. The cult uses it as their headquarters. I've been watching them for weeks, and I'm confident that's where they're keeping the harmonic stone.
How do we get there? Mara asked.
Carefully, Wren said. The sunken quarter is dangerous. The buildings are unstable, the water is toxic, and there are things living down there that aren't entirely human anymore. Plus, the cult will have guards. But I know a way in through the old sewer tunnels.
It's not pleasant, but it's relatively safe.
When do we leave? Mara asked.
Now, Voss said. We've already lost 1 day. We have 48 hours to retrieve the stone, return it to the chamber, and restart the bells. Every hour we delay, the seals weaken further.
They set out immediately, following Wren through the warren of alleys and abandoned buildings. The thief moved with the confidence of someone who knew every street and shadow, never hesitating, never getting lost. Mara struggled to keep up, unused to moving through the city at night, while Professor Voss maintained a steady pace despite her age.
They reached the entrance to the sewer tunnels, a grate hidden behind a pile of refuse in an alley most people avoided. Wren produced a set of tools and had the grate open in seconds, revealing a ladder descending into darkness.
"Ladies first," he said with a mocking bow.
"Age before beauty," Voss replied, and began climbing down. Mara followed, then Wren, who replaced the grate behind them.
The sewers were everything Mara had feared. Dark, damp, echoing with the sound of dripping water and the skittering of rats. The smell was indescribable. They lit torches and moved carefully through the tunnels, following Wren's lead as he navigated the underground maze.
"How do you know your way down here?" Mara asked, trying to distract herself from the horrible environment.
"I grew up in these tunnels," Wren said matter-of-factly. "I was orphaned at 6, ended up with a gang of street kids who made their home down here. We knew every inch of the sewers, which tunnels led where, which were safe to travel, which were controlled by rival gangs. It was a hard education, but a useful one."
They walked for what felt like hours, though Mara's sense of time was completely distorted in the darkness. Finally, Wren held up a hand, signaling them to stop.
"We're directly beneath the sunken quarter now," he whispered. "There's a way up ahead, but it opens into the flooded streets. We'll need to wade through chest-deep water for about 100 yards to reach the temple. Stay quiet. Sound carries strangely in the flooded areas."
They emerged from the sewers into what had once been a busy street, but was now a half-submerged ruin. Buildings rose around them like broken teeth, their lower floors completely underwater, their upper floors slowly crumbling. The water was black and foul-smelling, and Mara tried not to think about what might be swimming beneath the surface as they waded forward.
The temple rose ahead of them, its once grand facade now covered in moss and decay. But unlike the surrounding buildings, it showed signs of recent habitation, light flickering in some of the upper windows, and the sound of chanting drifting across the water. They reached the temple's entrance, a massive doorway that now stood half-submerged. Wren examined it carefully, then produced his tools again.
"Locked, but not well," he murmured. "Give me a minute."
While he worked, Mara and Professor Voss kept watch. The chanting continued, growing louder and more rhythmic. Mara couldn't make out the words, but the sound of it made her skin crawl. There was something wrong about it, something that resonated with a frequency that made her bones ache.
"They're preparing for something," Voss said quietly. "Some kind of ritual. If they're trying to accelerate the sleeper's awakening."
"Got it," Wren interrupted, and the door swung open with a groan of rusted hinges.
They slipped inside, finding themselves in what had once been a grand hall but was now a water-filled cavern. A staircase led upward, and they climbed carefully, weapons drawn, following the sound of chanting.
At the top of the stairs, they found themselves looking into the temple's main chamber. It was lit by dozens of candles, their flickering light revealing a scene that made Mara's blood run cold. 30 or more cultists filled the chamber, all dressed in robes of deep blue, all chanting in unison. At the center of the room, placed on an altar, was a crystal the size of a human head. It pulsed with its own internal light, and with each pulse, Mara could feel a vibration in her chest, as though her heartbeat was trying to synchronize with it.
The harmonic stone. And standing before the altar, leading the chant, was a figure in black robes marked with silver symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the candlelight. This was clearly the cult's leader, the one responsible for stealing the stone.
"We need a plan," Voss whispered. "We can't just charge in there. We're outnumbered 10 to 1.
"I can create a distraction," Wren offered. "Set a small fire in one of the side chambers. Make them think the building is collapsing. In the confusion, you two grab the stone and run."
"That's a terrible plan," Mara said.
You have a better one?
She didn't, but before they could debate further, the decision was taken out of their hands. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the cult leader raised their arms. The harmonic stone flared with brilliant light, and Mara felt a concussive wave of force that knocked her backward. The entire temple shook, and a deep grinding sound came from somewhere far below. The sound of ancient seals cracking, of something massive stirring in its prison.
"They're trying to wake it early," Voss shouted over the noise. "We have to stop them now."
There was no time for subtle plans. Mara charged into the chamber, sword raised, with Voss and Wren right behind her. The cultists turned in surprise, and for a moment chaos reigned. Mara fought like someone possessed, driven by terror and desperation. She was not a skilled warrior, but she was fighting for her city's survival, and that lent her strength. Beside her, Wren moved like a dancer, his twin knives flashing in the candlelight. Professor Voss wielded a heavy staff with surprising expertise, striking down cultists with practiced efficiency. They fought their way toward the altar, toward the pulsing crystal. The cult leader saw them coming and raised their hands, speaking words in a language that hurt to hear. Dark energy gathered around them, and Mara knew instinctively that if that energy was released, they would all die. But before the cult leader could complete their spell, something unexpected happened. A figure dropped from the rafters above, landing directly on the cult leader and bearing them to the ground. It was a man, dressed in the armor of a city guard captain, wielding a sword that gleamed with its own pale light.
"Get the stone," he shouted at Mara. "I'll hold them off."
Mara didn't question the sudden assistance. She lunged for the altar, grabbed the harmonic stone with both hands, and immediately felt a surge of energy so powerful it nearly stopped her heart. The crystal was warm, almost hot, and it vibrated with a frequency that seemed to resonate with her very soul.
"We have it!" she shouted. "Go! Go! Go!"
They ran. Behind them, the guard captain fought to give them time, his sword cutting through the dark energy the cult leader threw at him. Cultists tried to block their escape, but Wren and Voss cleared the way with brutal efficiency. They burst out of the temple and into the flooded streets, not slowing, not looking back. Behind them they could hear screams and shouts, the sound of pursuit. They splashed through the black water, ran through the sewers with reckless speed, climbed back to the surface world with burning lungs and trembling legs. They didn't stop until they were back in the warehouse district, hidden in the shadows, gasping for breath and checking to make sure they weren't followed. Did we actually succeed?" Mara panted, clutching the still pulsing harmonic stone. "We have the stone," Voss confirmed.
But we still need to get it back to the chamber beneath the central tower and restore it to its proper place. And we have less than 2 days to do it."
"Who was that guard captain?" Wren asked. "The one who saved us?"
"I don't know," Mara admitted. "But whoever he was, he bought us the time we needed." They would later learn that the man's name was Captain Marcus Brennan, a decorated officer of the city guard who had lost his family in a previous disaster and had dedicated his life to protecting Ashgate. He had been investigating the cult independently and had followed them to the temple that same night. His sacrifice gave them the head start they needed.
But that knowledge came later. For now, they had the harmonic stone, and they had a city to save.
Part 3. The Chamber of Chains. Getting into the chamber beneath the central tower proved more difficult than Mara had anticipated. The tower was heavily guarded now, the city officials having finally realized that something was seriously wrong with the bells. They weren't allowing anyone access to the tower, let alone the sealed chamber below.
"We'll have to sneak in," Wren said, studying the tower from a distance, which, fortunately, is my specialty. "The chamber is protected by more than just guards," Professor Voss warned. "According to the records, there are magical wards designed to prevent unauthorized access. We'll need someone who understands those wards to bypass them."
"Do you know anyone like that?" Mara asked. Voss hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's someone, a former colleague of mine who specializes in protective enchantments. Her name is Lissa Moonwhisper, and she's difficult, but she's the best in the city."
They found Lissa in a cramped apartment in the magic quarter, surrounded by books and scrolls and arcane instruments. She was a small woman, perhaps 60, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. When Voss explained their situation, Lissa's expression grew grave.
"The wards on that chamber were created by the city's founders," she said. "They're some of the most sophisticated protective magic I've ever studied. Bypassing them without triggering a defensive response will require precision and timing."
"Can you do it?" Mara asked.
Lissa's eyes glinted with what might have been excitement. "I can try, but I'll need time to study the wards first, to understand their structure. Give me until midnight. Meet me at the central tower then, and I'll have a plan." They spent the intervening hours preparing. Mara checked and rechecked the harmonic stone, making sure it hadn't been damaged in the fight. Wren scouted the tower's defenses, mapping out guard patrols and identifying weaknesses. Voss consulted her notes, reviewing everything she knew about the restoration ritual. At midnight, they reconvened at the base of the central tower. Lissa was already there, along with 2 other figures Mara didn't recognize. "These are my apprentices," Lissa explained. "They'll help with the ward breaking. The more channelers we have, the smoother this will go." Together, the group of 7 approached the tower. Wren disabled the guards at the entrance with quick, efficient strikes that left them unconscious but alive. Then Lissa led them to a hidden door at the tower's base, a servant's entrance that had been sealed years ago, but which Wren was able to pick open. Inside, they descended spiral stairs that seemed to go down forever, past the tower's foundation, deep into the bedrock beneath Ashgate. The air grew colder with each step, and Mara could feel a pressure building, as though they were descending into deep water. Finally, they reached a massive door made of black iron, covered in intricate symbols that glowed faintly with blue light. This was the entrance to the Chamber of Chains.
Lissa and her apprentices spread out around the door, each taking a position at one of the major ward notes. They began to chant, their voices harmonizing in complex patterns, and the symbols on the door began to pulse in response. "When I give the signal," Lissa said, her voice strained with concentration, "you'll have exactly 30 seconds to open the door and enter before the wards reset. Do not hesitate. Do not stop. 30 seconds."
The chanting reached a crescendo, and the blue light flared brilliantly. "Now!" Lissa shouted.
Ren lunged forward and applied his tools to the door's lock. His hands moved with impossible speed, and within 15 seconds, the lock clicked open. Mara and Voss pulled the heavy door aside and rushed through, carrying the harmonic stone between them.
The door slammed shut behind them, and the wards reset with a sound like thunder.
They were in.
The Chamber of Chains was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness high above. The walls were covered in more of the glowing symbols, creating a network of light that illuminated the space in eerie blue tones. And in the center of the chamber was the pedestal where the harmonic stone was meant to rest, a simple column of white marble, now empty.
But that wasn't what drew Mara's attention. Beneath the pedestal, visible through a circular opening in the floor, was the sleeper itself.
It was massive, filling what looked like a cavern the size of a cathedral. Mara couldn't make out its exact shape. It seemed to shift and change as she looked at it, her mind unable to fully process what she was seeing. One moment it looked like a sleeping giant, the next like a mass of writhing tentacles, the next like nothing she could describe.
And it was waking up.
The thing stirred in its prison, and with each movement, cracks spread through the stone that contained it. The seals were failing, just as the Chronicle of Chains had warned. They had perhaps hours, not days.
"Quickly," Voss urged. "Place the stone on the pedestal and speak the words of restoration."
Mara approached the pedestal, holding the harmonic stone. But as she raised it to set it in place, a voice echoed through the chamber.
"I wouldn't do that if I were you."
They spun to find the cult leader standing at the far end of the chamber. Somehow they had followed. Somehow they had gotten past the guards, past the wards, and now stood between Mara and their only hope of saving the city.
"The sleeper is a god," the cult leader said, their voice filled with fervent belief. "It sleeps not because it was defeated, but because it chose to wait. Wait for a time when humanity had grown numerous and spread across the world. When it wakes, it will feed on billions of souls, growing stronger than it ever was before. And those of us who helped wake it will be rewarded."
"You're insane," Voss said flatly.
"I'm enlightened," the cult leader corrected. "I've seen what lies beyond death, in the spaces between worlds. I've touched the sleeper's consciousness and felt its hunger. It promises transformation, transcendence, a release from the prison of mortal flesh."
"It promises extinction," Mara countered, "not transcendence, oblivion."
"Perhaps," the cult leader admitted, "but oblivion is still a kind of peace, isn't it? Better than this endless struggling, this meaningless existence in a world that grows darker every day."
While the cult leader spoke, Ren had been slowly moving around the edge of the chamber, trying to get into position, but the cult leader noticed.
"Ah, the little thief," they said, raising one hand. Dark energy crackled around their fingers. Such a predictable species, humans, always thinking they can outwit, outfight, outsmart. But you can't fight entropy. You can't defeat the inevitable.
The energy lashed out, and Wren barely dodged, rolling behind a pillar. Voss charged forward with her staff, trying to close the distance, but the cult leader was faster, their magic creating barriers that knocked her back. Mara realized she had only one chance. While the cult leader was distracted, she sprinted to the pedestal and slammed the harmonic stone onto its resting place.
Instantly, the crystal flared with light so intense it was almost painful to look at. A tone resonated through the chamber, not heard so much as felt, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the stone itself and spread outward in waves. Above them, throughout the city, the 13 bells began to ring. The sound was beautiful beyond description. 13 different tones harmonizing in patterns that spoke to something deep in the human soul. The bell of dawn, the bell of markets, the bell of morning, all of them ringing together, their voices combining to form a chain of sound that wrapped around the sleeper and pulled it back into enforced slumber. The cult leaders screamed in rage and despair as they felt their god being sealed away once more. They lunged toward the pedestal, trying to dislodge the stone, but Wren was faster. He tackled the cult leader from behind, and they both went sprawling to the floor.
The battle was brief but brutal. The cult leader fought with the strength of desperation, but they were alone and outnumbered. Between Wren's knives, Voss's staff, and Mara's sword, they didn't stand a chance. When it was over, the cult leader lay unconscious on the chamber floor, and the bells rang on, their voices steady and strong.
"Is it done?" Wren asked, panting. "Is the sleeper sealed again?"
Mara looked down through the opening in the floor. The massive form below was still, no longer stirring, the cracks in its prison sealed by the power of the restored bells.
"It's done," she confirmed. "The seals are holding. The city is safe." They stood in the chamber of chains, listening to the bells ring above them, and for the first time in 3 days, they allowed themselves to feel relief. Read normally. Part 4. The Cost of Silence. The aftermath of the crisis was both simpler and more complicated than Mara had expected. The city guard arrested the cult leader and rounded up the remaining children of the Deep Silence. Captain Brennan, who had survived his encounter in the temple despite serious injuries, was hailed as a hero. The truth about the bell's purpose was revealed to the city council, who were horrified to learn how close they had come to annihilation. But there were consequences that couldn't be easily resolved.
The harmonic stone, though restored to its pedestal, had been damaged by the cult's rituals. It still functioned, still powered the bells, but its light was dimmer than before. Professor Voss calculated that it would last perhaps another 100 years before failing completely.
"We have time," she said, meeting with Mara in the central tower a week after the crisis. "Time to find another solution, to create a new stone or discover a different way to maintain the seals. But this reprieve is temporary."
100 years is more than a lifetime, Mara replied. We'll figure something out.
But privately, she wondered if they really would. The knowledge of how to create harmonic stones had been lost centuries ago. The art of bellkeeping had become a mere trade, stripped of its deeper significance. Could they rediscover what had been forgotten? Could they ensure that when the stone failed again, someone would be ready?
She made a decision. She would dedicate her life to this purpose, as her father had before her. She would study everything about the bells, about the seals, about the sleeper beneath the city. She would train apprentices and pass on her knowledge, ensuring that the next generation would be better prepared.
Wren, surprisingly, chose to help her.
The thief had discovered that he enjoyed being part of something larger than himself, enjoyed having a purpose beyond simple survival.
Besides, he said with a grin, someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed. You're terrible at watching your own back.
Professor Voss returned to the university, but she maintained close contact with Mara, sharing research and collaborating on projects to strengthen the city's defenses. Lissa Moonwhisper began training a new generation of wardcrafters, teaching them the old arts that had nearly been forgotten.
And Captain Brennan, recovered from his injuries, took charge of a new division of the city guard dedicated to monitoring supernatural threats and preventing future cult activities.
Together, they formed an unofficial alliance, a small group of people who knew the truth about what lay beneath their city and who had committed themselves to standing guard over it.
The bells rang every hour, as they had for 300 years, as they would for 100 more, and people went about their lives, never knowing how close they had come to ending, never understanding the vigilance that kept them safe.
But Mara knew, and she would remember. On the first anniversary of the crisis, she stood in the central tower's observation deck, looking out over Ashgate as the sun set. Below her, the city bustled with evening activity, merchants closing their shops, families gathering for dinner, children playing in the streets. Normal life, made possible by chains of sound and the dedication of those who maintain them.
The bell of evening rang, its voice clear and strong, and Mara smiled. The silence had been broken. The dawn had come.
And she would ensure that the bells never stopped ringing again.
Read normally. Epilogue. Echoes.
75 years later, in the same central tower, a young woman climbed the stairs to the mechanism room. Her name was Ilara, and she was the newest apprentice Bellkeeper, learning the craft from Master Mara Thornwood, now white-haired and bent with age, but still sharp of mind and dedicated to her duty.
Tell me again, Ilara asked, as Mara showed her how to adjust the bell's tension. Why are the bells so important? What are they protecting us from?
Mara paused in her work and looked at her young apprentice. Should she tell her the truth? Should she burden this girl with the knowledge of what slept beneath the city, of the constant vigilance required to keep it contained?
She thought of her father, who had trained her without ever fully explaining the stakes. She thought of the 3 days of terror when the bells had fallen silent. She thought of Professor Voss's final words before her death 5 years ago. The next generation must be told. We can't risk them being unprepared.
Sit down, Mara said gently. There's a story you need to hear. A true story about the founding of this city, about what lies beneath it, and about the responsibility we bear as keepers of the bells. And as the sun set over Ashgate, as the bells rang the hour with their clear, strong voices, Mara told the story of the silence before dawn, and of the darkness that had once threatened to consume everything.
She told it so that it would be remembered.
She told it so that when her time came to pass on the burden, there would be someone ready to carry it.
She told it because some truths, no matter how terrible, must never be forgotten.
And far below, in its prison of stone and sound, the sleeper continued its endless slumber, held fast by chains of ringing bells and the dedication of those who would never let them fall silent again.
The watch continued.
The bells rang, and the world remained safe, for now, for as long as vigilance endured.
The end.